I'm going to start now. Okay? So I'm at Triangle Square, and I'm going to talk today about Mata Hari, who is probably the most famous female spy in history. And she was in World War I, and this is her story. So she was born in 1876 in the Netherlands. Her father was a Dutch officer, and her mother was Indonesian, dark skin from Indonesia. So she had sort of an olive skin. And she was born in 1876, and when she was born, her father was wealthy, and he doted on her and treated her very extravagantly, setting the tone for the rest of her life. But in 1889, he went bankrupt, and her parents got divorced, and her mother died soon afterwards. So she was sent to live with relatives, and she was sent to live with relatives, and they sent her to school when she was 15 to be a teacher. The relatives did. But she had an affair with the headmaster
Good for her.
when she was 15, and they kicked her out of the school, and the headmaster kept his job, which things haven't changed all that much. And so she was really in trouble because she had no money, and she was a scandal to the family. So she saw an ad in the papers for a Dutch officer whose name was Rudolph and McLeod, and he wanted a wife. He was a Dutch. He was in Java, the island of in Indonesia, and a Dutch officer, and he wanted a wife, and he was advertising, which they did in those times, for a wife. So she thought it sounded like a good idea. So she went and married him and met him. He was 20 years older than she was. They had 2 kids, but a very unhappy marriage. He was a violent drunk. He had a concubine on the side. She started to have affairs too, and he beat her. And they had 2 kids, and what happened was she had a son and a daughter. The son was like 2 years old, the daughter was 5. And it's unclear what happened. One story is one of the housekeeper tried to poison the children, or they had syphilis from both parents being, fooling around, which people did get syphilis, and there was no cure for it in those days. So the son died, and it broke up the family. She left him, she came back, she left him again, and she got custody of the daughter, but so they divorced in 1902. And once again, she had no money. Their family, wasn't going to help her. So she lost custody of her daughter, and she had to do something. So she went to Paris in 1902, and she worked for the circus as an equestrian and exotic dancer. She worked in private salons first, and in 1903, Paris, Indonesian and the Far East was a big fad. It was very popular in those days and very free sexually. Before the war, from 1900 to 44 really, Paris was a mecca for gay life and freedom, sexual freedom. And so she started dancing with veils, and she basically was a stripper. She reinvented herself. She told stories. She made her past a lot more colorful than it really was. And she had a lot of lovers. So she started dancing in 1903 in Paris. And again, she started this because she had no money and no way to earn money. And she started dancing, and she named herself Mata Hari, which means Eye of the Day in Indonesian, or the sun, and that was her name. And it was basically a striptease with veils, although she always covered her breasts and she wore a body stocking. But it was very hard to see the body stocking, so it looked like she didn't have any clothes on. And she did the striptease, and she said it was a Javanese temple sacred dance, which of course it was not, but that's how she advertised herself. And so she was very popular all over the world, and she traveled all over Europe. She had affairs with, the Rothschilds, the Crown Prince of Germany. I mean, she had very high-class, wealthy lovers, and she was dancing. And then the war started, and in 1915, she was getting older and fatter. It happens to the best of us, right? And she was losing she was losing some of her credibility as a dancer because she was older, and she was almost 40 by that time. So, she sort of passed her prime. So she became a courtesan for very wealthy men to continue herself in the lifestyle to which she had become accustomed. And so she was doing that in the war, and because she had a Dutch passport, she was able to travel all over Europe during the war because it was a neutral country. So she went to Germany and France and, England, all over the place. And at one point she fell in love with a Russian soldier who I think was the only love of her life, and is Captain Masalov. And he was in the war for Russia, and he was blinded in one eye, so he was handicapped. So she wanted to visit him in the hospital, and the French said, if you spy for us, we'll let you visit him, but if we won't, otherwise forget it. So she loved him so much, so she agreed to spy for France at that point. And there was a man named Georges Ledoux, who was the French head of intelligence, and he asked her to spy for France. So she said yes, but she was very naive, and also wherever she goes, she was the center of attention. She dressed extravagantly in furs. I'll show you these photos afterwards. And she was just a natural, exhibitionist, and attracted attention wherever she goes. So, but she was sleeping with all of these important people, and they were hoping to get secret information from her about them. The French were. So he asked her to spy for him, but she sent him uncoded letters. She walked right into his office in France and said, here I am, I'm here to see Georges Ledoux. I mean, she was she wasn't very secretive about anything. She was very naive. She probably wasn't a super good spy, but she was a narcissist probably and everything, but she was a very fun lady. And actually she was at a party, one of the lesbians in France had a backyard, and Mata Hari rode her favorite horse naked through the girls' backyard. And it was one of those scandalous lesbian parties that she could go to. Although she probably slept with some of those women. I don't know. It didn't say. She's definitely at least bi. But so she sent him uncoded letters and didn't really give him too much important information. But then, and the war went on. And at one point, she was sleeping with this German high military officer, and she was supposed to get information from him. And he got wind of it, and he said, I'm going to get her. So he sent the French a coded letter, which they already had the code to, saying she was one of their best spies, German spies, because the Germans wanted to get rid of her. So the French intercepted this letter, which the Germans knew they would, and they wanted to accuse her of being a double agent. And so they tried her in 1916 and 17. And the trial that she had, they had no real evidence against her. She hadn't really gotten any secrets out of them. I mean, the Germans paid her 20,000 francs, which was a lot of money. But she always said that she viewed it as recompense for the clothing that they'd stolen from her, her furs and jewelry that they'd stolen from her when she was traveling all over, and she didn't really view it as payment for being a spy. And again, I don't think she ever had much information for anybody, because she was so open about spying for France that I don't know why anybody would have talked to her. But they really tampered with evidence, and during the trial, which was secret, Georges Ledoux tampered with evidence. They basically went after her because of her immoral nature, because she was a stripper, and it was all right before the war, but during the war, everybody got very conservative and right-wingish, even in France. So the women were supposed to be subservient and under the men and chaste and pure and self-sacrificing, none of which Mata Hari was. And I think that's why that she got people angry. They loved her for it earlier, but then they hated her for it later. And so they blamed it on her bad character, which is really why they executed her. They didn't have any real evidence against her. And actually, so in 1917, they executed her, and in front of a firing squad. 6 of her lovers tried to help her when she was in jail, but they couldn't do it. And she went in front of the firing squad. She had a blue coat and a blindfold, and she took off the blindfold and faced the firing squad and blew the soldiers a kiss, and then they killed her and they shot her. So, but immediately after she was dead, she became a legend, and the stories went around and around. They said that probably she was a scapegoat, because the Allies had lost, they'd bungled the war, even though they won, they had bungled it. They'd lost an enormous number of men, and the public sentiment in the army was getting very, angry about the leadership and how many casualties they'd had. So they were trying to make a scapegoat out of her, and they said that she was responsible for the death of 50,000 French soldiers, which is completely not true. Georges Ledoux himself was accused of being a double agent later on. He was the head of French intelligence. He was accused of being a double agent himself later on, but he wasn't convicted. So maybe he escaped that, but I could see him being a double agent, but not her. So that's her story, and she was very brokenhearted that she didn't have custody of her daughter. The father kept the daughter away from her because he wouldn't pay child support, and that did break her heart. And her daughter, I didn't research what happened to her daughter. Her husband's mother was a cousin to Audrey Hepburn's parents, which is sort of interesting.
Wow.
Audrey Hepburn's parents, I think, were both Nazis. I read that
Really?
on the internet. But Greta Garbo did a movie about Mata Hari in 1931, and it was so risque that they had to censor it. And I don't even think they have the real version out now. It's still censored. But it was her biggest grossing movie, and I'm sure she was fabulous in it. And you'll see I have a couple of photos of her. She looks wonderful. Of course, she always looks wonderful. But, and also she started the whole legend of a spy that's super sexual. It became part of her legend. It influenced the creators of James Bond and other spy stories for many years to come. So, and also there's a museum in the Netherlands in her hometown that has a room dedicated to her. They have scrapbooks of her and a carpet that she danced on. So if you ever get to the Netherlands, you want to see it, I think it's in Fries, F-R-I-S is the name of the town. But anyway, that's the story of Mata Hari, who was really an independent woman and a self-made woman from total poverty with nothing going for her. She created herself a life, an independent life. Again, in those days, even now, women are supposed to be under the thumbs of men. For a woman to be independent was scandalous in itself. And that's half the reason they turned against her.
Wow.
So it's a wonderful story, and I'm happy to share it with you guys. Okay, you can turn that off.
Wow.
Applause,
now, I want
applause.
to pass around